Well, everyone, it's time for us to go and take a look at the 2015 MacBook Air and see how this specific MacBook has held up since 2015. So let's go and see how it holds up in 2023. Now, if you want to pick up some MacBooks I would recommend this year, links will be down in the description. You can get that from there and you can help support the channel at the same time. Now, starting off with the MacBook Air, you have to keep in mind this was the 2015 model, and some people have stated that the 2015 MacBooks were some of the best MacBooks Apple has ever made. This includes their MacBook Pro, but also their MacBook Air. Now, their Air, I remember like it was yesterday. Not necessarily when this MacBook came out, but when I was actually planning on buying my first MacBook, it was around 2016, and I was juggling between the 2015 MacBook Air or the 2014 MacBook Pro, and I decided going for the MacBook Pro. I thought that was the better choice, and one of the biggest complaints that I actually saw from something like the MacBook Air was its display. In so many Reddit comments I was reading during that time, everybody was saying that if the MacBook Air just had a Retina display, I would buy it in a heartbeat. That's what a majority of people were saying, and a lot of people were saying it's never going to happen. They ended up doing that, and I do think how the MacBook Air lineup holds up now is actually pretty good. With the M1 MacBook Air and the M2 MacBook Air, I think Apple did a tremendous job with those specific devices. So I want to kind of get that out of the way, that those MacBooks are the ones I would highly recommend buying. These 2015 MacBooks aren't even really supported anymore, so that is kind of the issue that we're having in this specific situation. So with the 2015 MacBook Air, the outside of it, it still feels and looks very premium. This was still one of my favorite things going for this MacBook. Even now when I pick it up and I kind of mess around with it, I am surprised how premium this thing still feels like. And it's been years and years. It's been like, 7 years or 8 years since this MacBook came out. That is insane. So at the very top, you have your Apple logo, you have your silver casing around it, and it actually looks pretty good. Now, this MacBook came out in 2 different sizes. It came out in like an 11-inch size and a 13-inch size. I've seen the 11-inch size like a couple of times, but for the most part, I think a majority of people that I know did end up buying that, 13-inch size MacBook, and it looked pretty good. It was a pretty big size. That Apple logo on the back still lit up when you open it, and that's something I really do miss, and a lot of people miss that, but that was something you were basically getting on this type of MacBook, which was honestly pretty cool. Now, on the sides, the really cool thing about these MacBook Airs that Apple's kind of taken away now with the M2 MacBook Air, which has completely changed the perspective on these MacBooks, was actually its tapered off design. So what Apple basically did was that they went ahead and essentially when the MacBook lid was closed or even when it's open, it kind of gave you like this tapered off design. So it ended up starting at its thickest point and it ended up getting super thin towards the end of it. Apple kept this design for many years, but it looked very good. I love the way this MacBook looked, and even now it still looks very good. If you were planning on getting something like this and you were carrying it around with you, the biggest asset of it was the fact that it did taper off and that it did look fairly slim and it was a pretty small footprint. So that was always something I really liked about it. The port selection on this MacBook Air wasn't out of this world, but it was still a pretty decent amount of ports you were getting at that time. So on the left side, you were basically getting your MagSafe 2 charging port. So you can go and plug this thing in and basically charge up your MacBook Air. You were also getting a USB 3 port. You were also getting your headphone jack on the left side. You're also getting dual microphones on the left side too, which is interesting. On the right side of the MacBook, this was awesome. You were getting a single Thunderbolt 2 port, so you can dock it up to a display or to a dock of some sort. You were getting another USB 3 port, and you were getting an SD card slot on the MacBook Air as well. Now, what is really weird about this is that nowadays, well, at least for many years, we were missing out on so many of these ports. For the MacBook Air lineup, you were ever only getting 2 USB-C ports on the left side. That was it. Now we are getting that additional MagSafe charging port, but it would have still been really nice to have an SD card slot on our MacBook Airs. We now have it on our MacBook Pros, but I do think there is room for Apple to go and bring something like this over to their specific MacBook Air lineup, and I think they may end up doing it at some point. But that was something that when you look back at the 2015 MacBook Air, it still has more ports than we're getting on the M2 MacBook Air, and I would way rather have the port selection, I think, on the actual 2015 MacBook Air than the M2 MacBook Air, mostly because of getting USB ports on both sides and actually getting an SD card slot that's dedicated on it as well. Yeah, we're missing some USB-C ports, but still, I just use my SD card way more. On top of that, on the bottom casing, you weren't really getting too much, and that was basically it on the outside. Now flipping this thing open, and that's where things get even more interesting. So we were getting this pretty decent, 13-inch display. Now I know a lot of people hear that and will disagree with me completely. I am not a fan of this display, but I will say for it being the cheaper MacBook that you can buy, for it not looking exactly the same as a MacBook Pro, the Retina displays were beautiful. This display really was not that great at all. It was not that good of a resolution. I will still say for it working, for it, having a display, we have to give it some credit. This MacBook was not going to be perfect by any means, and hopefully if you were buying something like this MacBook, you had a pretty decent display that you could go ahead and dock it up to. That way you can kind of close this MacBook Air and just use it with its dedicated display. But regardless, on the top panel, like I said, you had that specific, device panel. You had a 13-inch display. You had a front-facing camera, which was nice. On the bottom, you did actually have your keyboard. Now the keyboard on this thing was actually pretty good. It was full, quality. It was great quality. It wasn't like a, half of the travel missing like on the 2016 MacBook, Pros or the later MacBook Airs. This thing had a full-size keyboard, which was beautiful. You were also getting your touchpad at the very bottom, the trackpad, which you can go ahead and move around and you can do whatever you wanted to do with it. And this was something that was really nice. I really did like this specific keyboard, and I liked the way this MacBook looked overall. It did not look ugly, and if you were still planning on buying something like this MacBook, I think you were in decent company for the most part. Now, one thing I would probably tell you with this specific MacBook is that the display really is going to be the make it or break it for you. If, back then, if you were planning on buying a MacBook like this, you were basically avoiding this MacBook because of the display. Maybe a lot of people didn't really care about it. I knew a lot of people that bought these types of MacBooks that didn't care about the display. And, I think that's totally okay. I don't even think that's that big of a deal. But I think for some people, that is one of those things to kind of keep in mind. Now, another thing that I did kind of like about this MacBook was actually the fact that it was so much cheaper than its other competition. In fact, because the design of this MacBook was so similar to like a 2014 and 2013 and maybe even the 2012 MacBook Air, you could have just bought those MacBooks. Yeah, they were way less powerful than this one, but you were still saving a bunch of money that way too. And that was the main reason why I think a lot of people bought the MacBook Airs, is because they were much cheaper and you were just able to save a lot more money that way than buying something like a MacBook Pro during that time. So I look at this MacBook, right? And because the next generation of MacBooks were so much better, things like the MacBook Air of like 2018, 2019, but especially the M1 models, the M1 MacBook Pro, the M1 MacBook Air, I look at basically all the MacBooks they made before that, not even just the, MacBook Airs, the MacBook Pros before 2020, the MacBook Airs before 2020. I look at all those MacBooks and I'm just thinking to myself, wow, Apple has truly done some weird things with their previous MacBooks, and nowadays the latest MacBooks look so much better and perform much better than this specific MacBook or the other ones, right around this one. So I say that to say, if you were planning on getting this type of MacBook Air, I wouldn't recommend it. It's not supported with software. It's not that great of a build quality anymore. It's a great build quality, but the display's not that great. It's not that powerful. And there's not really a big reason of buying any sort of MacBook like this anymore, when you can go ahead and buy something like a 2020 M1 MacBook Air that's already gone down in the price tag quite a bit. That one makes way more sense to buy than this specific MacBook. And that's just one of those things to keep in mind. If you're planning on buying an M1 MacBook Air, I couldn't recommend that MacBook enough. It's not like the latest and greatest, but you can buy those MacBooks all day. Apparently on eBay, they're going for like $600, $800 sometimes. Like, it depends on the quality. I could not recommend that MacBook enough if I'm being honest. The M1 MacBook Pro I would also highly recommend too. But the 2015 ones, like, if you're still using it, go for it. But I probably wouldn't recommend using those MacBooks anymore, to be honest. It's probably time to go and upgrade to something like those M1 models at this point. So that pretty much covers it up. If you have any other thoughts or questions, please let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.